Welcome to the Real Bible Rob podcast. I'm so delighted to have a special guest today, Reverend Jeff Sievert, who is a longtime friend of mine. He was my pastor for 25 years before I was ordained, and he taught me virtually everything I know about worship. And liturgy. In fact, when I took worship classes in seminary, I go, I already know this stuff because Jeff was such a good teacher, and he became quite well known during his career in presbytery circles for having beautiful worship, designing worship for the presbytery. And there's no one better to speak about the value of liturgical worship, especially in this time, and what makes a worship service beautiful. So we'll talk a little bit about history and why we do it this way, but mostly just focus on the reason behind liturgical worship and how do you make it beautiful. The rediscovery of worship by liturgical worship by young people is a big topic nowadays. So we'll certainly talk a little bit about that and how to serve them and how maybe this tells us something about the future of the church. So, welcome to the podcast, Jeff. I'm so delighted that you're here.
Well, thank you so much, Rob, and I so much appreciate your asking. This is a new experience for me, and I'm so pleased that you've opened the door to be able to have it, and especially to talk about these kinds of things. And of course, I am somewhat humbled, if not moved, to hear you describe our relationship, because certainly over the years I've been learning from you and your family as well, and we've shared some significant stuff together. So.
We
Thank you
certainly
for that.
have, yes. Yeah, and it's just a long-term relationship that continues to go, even though we live in different cities and everything. So thank you. I was just wondering, to get started, I was just wondering if you could just give a little bit of background on how you engaged in church and what drove you to ministry. And how your career developed just a little bit, and then get into where did this big interest in liturgical worship come from?
Sure. We could spend an hour just doing that, but I'll try to keep it short and let me know if we need to cut to the chase. Um, I grew up a block away from a Presbyterian church, which ended up being my home. The story goes that my Methodist parents, who took me to their church for some time, the idea being we would all become Methodist at some point, backfired. And by going to the Presbyterian church I could walk to a block away, I ended up becoming Presbyterian, and so did they.
Oh.
Um, so my initial exposure was social, and it met a need for a teenage guy who's looking for those connections and maybe a connection with something beyond.
Hmm.
Um, I was not a very willing participant at first, but gradually engaged about in high school, where I became a leader in the
Oh.
high school youth group and
Uh-huh.
working with the leaders, the adult leaders who ran things, and was I was one of those special kids, um,
Yeah.
which I've learned now that I'm one of those older people just means that I was nice to the adults. Uh,
Yes.
and because I know how much that is appreciated by adults now. So I was taken under the wing of the pastor at that point in the church. He took me with him at the time to Fuller Seminary to
Mm.
interview possible youth assistants, as we
Wow.
called them
Okay.
back in the day. It's my first airplane ride too.
Huh.
So that was a significant experience, and I served on the deacons. I was on the organ selection committee, sang in the choir, led in the youth
Uh-huh.
group. um, all those things. And as I said, to be honest, it was a combination of the social interaction
Yeah.
and some sense of something more to life than what you could see at the end of your nose.
Yeah.
Something going on. It's like it felt to me in the world like there's something going on here, and
Yes.
I can't quite see it, but I feel it. And so it was an opportunity to connect with those things. I remember in terms of worship, being on the worship committee, I was part of a team during a period of transition. We were a little bit upstart-ish and kind of wanted to do away with some of the liturgical stuff and
Oh,
make it
uh-huh.
more real
Yes.
and make it more immediate,
Accessible.
accessible, well, and authentic,
Yeah.
because it seemed to me at the time that the liturgical structure, and I don't think I even knew that word at the time, was was stifling at worst
Uh-huh.
um, and insincere at best.
Yeah.
Um, so that's where I started. And the church itself was Presbyterian. It was evangelical to a degree, but
Hmm.
in the sense of evangelical 50 years ago.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
So a kind and gentle,
Yes.
softer evangelicalism.
The pre-moral majority, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's also my experience too. That's where I came
That's
from.
right.
So
Yeah.
so it by this time with your involvement, were you already thinking that you were going to be a pastor?
Yeah, I had some sense of it in high school.
Hmm.
All the things seemed to be heading that way, and I sometimes talk about it in terms of a three-stranded cord that drew me in that direction.
Uh-huh.
One being the sense of the transcendent, something else
Hmm.
beyond what you can see, and um, a social disposition. I have always been that guy that a stranger on the bus could tell their story to. And so that sense of connectedness with people,
Uh-huh.
including some of the leadership qualities that began to emerge. And then the sense that somehow the Bible offered a entry point to
Uh-huh.
those mysteries and to a way of being present with people and helpful to people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's such a privilege, isn't it? That's what I've noticed is when people share with you things that they don't really even share with their own family or to widely because they trust you and they want to have that kind of spiritual discussion. It's just so enriching. Yeah,
It is, and
yeah,
important to remember as we learn in seminary school that it's partly about the role.
yeah.
Um, the people go to the pastor, and if there's a person who is the pastor who is this kind of accessible, affirming, accepting kind of person, that's so much the better. But
Yes,
the
yeah,
sad thing is that sometimes people respond to the role and then discover that the person in the role is not accessible, they're judgmental, they
yes.
don't understand, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, or they abuse their power because
Exactly.
it's a place of great power.
Yep.
So at some point certainly the zeitgeist in the 70s was to move towards simpler worship and everything like that. At some point you embraced liturgical worship. When did that happen?
It's a great question. I've been thinking about it. It's funny sometimes in interviews these days, isn't it, where the guest will affirm the questioner. Um, that's a great question.
Yes.
You should ask more questions like that. What's the next one? Um, I think there was an interim period in there when worship was important. The role of music in worship was important. I recognized that there were ways of doing it that seemed better than others,
Hmm.
uh, more fitting, more satisfying. but that there was a form that was evident, even though I didn't think about it a lot at the time. Um, I'm trying to remember one of my mentors lamented that in the Presbyterian Church there had ceased to be adequate training in liturgical worship. We were kind of left
Mm-hmm.
to our own devices,
Right.
and I think that that was probably true to some extent. I began my seminary career at Fuller
Mm-hmm.
Theological Seminary in Pasadena, and that was not worship was not a big part of that, perhaps because in the 80s there was more this sense that it's a matter of the heart, and we confess our sins and we hear a sermon,
Yeah.
but much sense of the structure um, or intentionality about it. When I got to San Francisco Theological Seminary in the Bay Area, um, there were worship classes and there were preaching
Yeah.
classes that I
Huh.
didn't get to at Fuller. And they're much more intentional about it there. Still not as full as my mentor would like,
Yeah.
but a much fuller experience and intentionality about worship to the point where the speech professor taught us how to hold a baby in a baptism,
Uh-huh.
and
Oh, really?
yeah, and he told us when we preside at the table, don't do the don't do the recipe reading version of the communion liturgy,
Uh-huh.
as if to say, and it was on the night that he was betrayed that Jesus took bread and he broke it,
Okay. Yes.
and he said instead, and I remember this to this day because I it almost moves me to think about this.
Uh-huh.
Um, Practical things. He said, um, preside at the table with arms open wide
Yeah.
to make vulnerable your core.
Yeah. Oh, uh-huh.
Um,
Yes. Yeah.
and there's times when I've done communion where when I break the bread, I kind of look around the
Right,
congregation. At
right,
one point, I
right.
told them, I can see you between the broken
Yes,
in
right.
the broken bread. Um, so those things began to suggest to me that there was a form, a good way of doing things that communicate.
Mm-hmm.
They speak. They say things even aside from the words. So if the bread is broken and your arms are
Mm-hmm.
open, you're making yourself available, and you're making the gospel available. You're making
Mm-hmm.
the sacrament available just by the motions,
Yeah.
the liturgical actions.
I think that's a great point because there is a great physicality in your worship style where the movements matter uh, um, and there's where you are on up front and how you move and what you the tearing it and what's when you pour into the baptismal for the affirmation of what is that affirmation of forgiveness or I forget which
De-
term you use it for
Declaration of forgiveness.
declaration of forgiveness. I use slightly different terminology, but yeah, that is and the movements of lighting the candles and so forth. So there's that great thing, and so why do you think that's important? I mean, you kind of mentioned it a little bit about making yourself vulnerable, but what do you think that does to people when they're participating in that?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. One is that part of what we're doing in worship is conveying meaning. We're not
Hmm.
creating it, but we are conveying it. And it's pretty clear that if a talking head sits on a screen or stands in a pulpit and simply delivers information, that's a whole lot different
Yeah.
thing than if the people sing, if the people pray, if they have words to say, as well as the leader having words to say. Um, it creates a more fertile environment for meaning to be conveyed. Without those things, I think the experience is truncated.
Yeah.
I I I would go as far as to say impoverished.
Yeah, yeah.
Although because the Holy Spirit is at work, people's lives are touched and meaning is conveyed even even in the most deplorable of worship service.
Well, I was thinking, as you were talking, is that the typical megachurch evangelical, usually Baptist, sometimes charismatic service is 30 minutes of praise music, usually selected quite manipulatively in order to get you into a certain mood, right? And then a 45-minute sermon. And if they're going to do communion, it's going to be a 2-minute affair, maybe with those little cups that they pass out. And so it's a very much of a stripped down thing. I don't know if it's an Anabaptist thing, maybe it has those roots and those, stripped down churches, from the Anabaptist movement. And I mean, certainly there's a Baptist aspect to this, right? That came, and in a lot of respects, Presbyterians turned into Baptists over the last couple of generations, and so, but this stripped down, sort of simplified worship. Uh, Corresponded very much with the rise of the megachurch. Um, and that led to the worship wars in our own denomination, right? What are we going to do about music and how are we going to engage with music and other other aspects of worship? Um, what do you think about, well, first of all, did you have to deal with the worship wars very much, or did you have to explain to people, or uh, what do you think of the worship wars, and what was your participation in the worship wars of the last 50 years?
Well, to quote George H.W. Bush, it was time to stay the course. 1,000 points of light. Uh, um, Seriously, though, it felt to me like it was important to stay the course,
Yeah.
to to create a culture um, of quality, faithful worship. Um, that people could begin to fully engage. And
Hmm.
and the congregation that I served was not especially inclined, I don't think, to other kinds of worship. Although, and you can speak to this more than I can, and I don't know how much we want to be specific, but
Yeah.
the congregation did have a little bit of kind of small mega church type worship. Um, uh, One of the members often offered a solo, and
Yes.
with a microphone in one hand and a
Yeah.
cord in the other hand. And one of the older members of the congregation referred to as our little nightingale.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and it's lovely to have people sharing their
Yeah. Yeah.
gifts.
There's always
And
this
yet
balance of performance and participation, right? And
Exactly.
yeah.
Um, so, so that it wasn't a big issue. And I also took some lessons from a colleague who I connected with arriving here, who was doing interim or transitional ministry.
Hmm.
And she and I had both been a part of a liturgical renewal program that I can say more about at some point if you'd like.
Yeah.
Um, but her whole approach to interim ministry was largely liturgical.
Uh-huh.
She would gently kind of nudge the worship service into something that was not anyone's uh, property, but was in some cases innovative or different for the
Yeah.
congregation, but very much in keeping with the church's history and Reformed heritage and
Uh-huh.
the unfolding liturgical movement.
Well,
So
in my case too, is because I've pretty much followed the pattern that you have, obviously with some small differences, but I have found as a pastor having a rich liturgy means that the service and the experience doesn't hang on one thing. And so if I have somebody who offers a solo or does something and it's really, not that comfortable to listen to, or there's a reading that isn't, you just wait a few minutes and you're into something else, right? And I don't know if that is that there's a resiliency to a liturgical worship service, I think, that you don't have otherwise.
that's a great way to put it. I suppose that you could say with a mega church type church, there, or even just a big one, um, there are resources
Yeah,
by which you can paper over a lot of those uh, deficiencies. You're going to have a sound person who is fixing
yeah,
the sound. You're going to have the best readers, the best singers, et cetera, the best
yeah.
guitar players, et cetera, et cetera. Um,
You'll never have an out of tune singer on the stage, you know.
and
But what do
it
you
will be a
lose?
stage.
Yeah, and it will be a stage. So what do you lose when you don't have the out of tune or the person who stumbles or that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Right, yeah, and I think you're exactly right. Resilience is a good word. I sometimes talk about the center line. We know where the center line is. So
Uh-huh.
if we get off this way or that way, we'll get back on again because whatever this problem is that developed, there's a reading that comes next, or
Yes.
there's a prayer that
Yeah.
comes next, or there's a hymn that comes next, and we're back on track again.
Uh-huh.
Uh, the other thing, commenting on what you said about the usefulness of a structure being resilient, it's also not all about the preacher, even. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
I am not and never will be a tall steeple preacher. I'm not that smart or disciplined. Um, so I depend on the rest of the liturgy to be
Uh-huh.
supporting and enfolding what I offer. And I have preached as a guest in various places since retiring, and it's one of the things that I become aware of. You know,
Uh-huh. Yes.
I need this hymn to be part of the service because it strengthens the sermon,
Yeah,
or I
yeah.
need this prayer to follow, or I sometimes I even, I need the service to be conducted in this way versus another way because that will help me preach the sermon.
Yeah. It decenters the preacher a little bit.
Good word.
And because, if you go to one of these typical services, the preacher is the star, right? And everything hangs on the preacher. And I find that a bit of I mean, that's a Charles Spurgeon sort of way of looking at things, right? The whole idea of expository teaching and stuff like that is that it's so preacher centric and that a lot of people are, you go to I was thinking of Episcopal churches and we kind of switch gears here a little bit. And you go to Episcopal church, you get a book, right, that has the whole liturgy in it. And the homily, maybe 8 minutes,
Mhm.
it's like, I always think of, uh, what's her name? Barbara Brown Taylor.
Yes.
Yes. And her sermons are fantastic, right? But they're 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah.
In fact, they're even a little too simple for me, but I want a little more meat than that. I want
Yeah.
something in between. But the thing is because if you do any more than a 7 or 8 minutes s- sermon in an Episcopal church, you're going to be there for an hour and a half or three
Right.
quarters, right? Because there's so much liturgy. Um,
Right. And of
so
course, just one
go
more thing.
ahead.
We, as Reformed Presbyterians, we tread close to potentially rough ground when we talk about the place of preaching,
Yeah,
because the word rightly preached is central to what we believe, not because preachers are to be hotshot center of attention,
Yeah.
but because we believe we meet God in Scripture, and
Yes. Yes.
that is important. We don't want to minimize that, but
Right.
I think what we've been saying about the resilience and support that the liturgy provides, it strengthens the preaching. Uh,
Yes.
so but I felt it was important to offer that
Oh
disclaimer.
yeah, for sure. And that's why I think, with the reintroduction or more churches doing lectionary readings and stuff like that, and long format readings. So it's not just one verse or two, and then you go off for on a sermon. There's long format reading. And that's something you've always done. You've had the full readings and all of that. And I've continued that in my um, in my worship services as well. Is I even if I don't mention those that particular reading, having it there gives context and gives support,
Well,
and it does center scripture a lot more. Yeah. So this part of this movement then that we're seeing today, you're countercultural because before it was cool, you were into liturgical worship, and today there's a flocking of young people going to liturgical churches, evangelicals primarily. They're going for various reasons. Part of the reason they go is they just want something richer and more beautiful. Eastern Orthodox Church is growing. Probably one of the success stories that we're seeing lately. Um, Anglican churches are a mixed bag, but there is some more interest in that. In fact, when I was in seminary, there was a Foursquare pastor from Eugene, a really wonderful guy. He was talking about how he has quotes from the mystics and he's adding all these liturgical elements to a Foursquare service of all
hmm,
things. I go, to me, that was like a light bulb went off. I go, even if a Vineyard Church or a Foursquare Church or one of these more charismatic type churches adds a little bit of liturgy, there's something going on,
hmm,
right? And
interesting.
part of it's also, I'd say, more the negative reason is that some, especially young men, are looking for patriarchy,
Hmm,
misogyny. They're looking for safe spaces for their biases, right?
hmm.
But overall, there's a movement. First of all, have you seen that yourself? Have you experienced that, especially as you've gone to other churches for interim work, pulpit supply, and things like that? Are you getting that sense as well?
Yeah, the the churches that call on me to provide pulpit supply, as we call it, um, are often churches that are already kind of on this road.
Uh-huh.
I'm aware of another church where I've had some contact that hasn't been known for liturgical worship, and they have a praise band,
Uh-huh.
um, and and yet they use the lectionary
Uh-huh.
most of the time,
Yeah.
and they are open to incorporating liturgical structures in their worship service. So that I suppose is the only place I can testify firsthand that I've seen
Yes.
you're describing unfolding. The other thing that happens though that's interesting, uh, um, and I don't quite know how to describe this, but sometimes the churches that use liturgical forms don't let them breathe and live as much as would be good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in some cases,
Oh.
it almost it almost feels to me like 6-year-olds who discovered their parents' clothing and dressed up, but
Yeah. A
but
little bit, yeah.
but then don't know what to do. So for instance, the worship service may include references to baptism. It may be in the scriptures, it may be
Uh-huh.
in the
Yeah.
sermon, but there's no font.
Yeah.
Um, and this might be controversial, but the leader will in a responsive liturgy, the leader will read the leader part, but then also lead the congregation's part. And I get that they're probably trying to be supportive,
Yes,
but
right.
let
Yeah.
the congregation
Respond.
work. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because if the leader's gonna do both parts, the congregation is not really necessary.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so so I guess that was a little side tirade.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. But I think it's no, I was thinking as you were talking that, everything's sort of in a spectrum, right? We always have a distribution of things. The distribution in general I believe, has shifted toward more liturgical worship. So those churches that are highly liturgical are just going to be even a little more so, right?
mhm.
And those that had no liturgy whatsoever may add elements, right?
Uh,
Or
I,
at least say the words that indicate that. So, it, you know, so I'm just kind of thinking if we have that interest out there, is this telling us something about how we should attract people in the future in church?
well, that question is a little bit above my pay grade, but I'm happy to share a
I'm
few
also
thoughts.
asking, preaching to the choir here a little bit. I'm asking somebody who's, I already know the answer, but
Yeah.
but
Um,
what are your thoughts about that?
well, there are some people, and they may be associated with the emergent church movement, who suggest that we need not to attract people, but we need to have a missional presence in the
Uh-huh.
world.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how that fits with worship that attracts people.
Okay.
Because, I mean, do we really want to bring people in, or do we want to learn how to send our people out?
Uh-huh.
Um, and that's kind of a fun thing question to raise. I don't know for sure how helpful it is practically
Yeah.
speaking. We're going to have a worship service, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're going to want people to come to it. But I guess the challenge is that this liturgical sensibility, the rise of more of it, um, is set in what people perceive as traditional and perhaps irrelevant organizations.
Hmm.
Young people may prefer these kinds of things and appreciate them, but they're not necessarily going to show up at our Presbyterian church
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
discover that it's there. Um, so, so what does that mean? Do we take liturgy on the road? Do you frame a podcast in terms of some kind of liturgical structure? Probably not,
Yeah.
because it's not worship. Um, that's a puzzlement.
Well,
Um,
I'm glad you mentioned the emerging church. I just did an episode on that, which will be up before this one, and in that. Talk about Phyllis Tickle and some of the theory behind that, and that we've been polarized so much in the church. We've been sent off into our corners, especially with some of the aggressive, Christian nationalism of today. I would say there's certainly culture war aspects of that have sent us off into our corners, but I think the worship wars also did that to us, right? So it put separation between the liturgical people and the charismatics. It put separation between us more social justice type Christians, mainliners, and the more traditional people, right? And it's just put us. So I'm wondering if this new interest in liturgy and the attractive aspect of it is a meeting place
hmm.
where people, because that's what the emergent church is all about. It's finding a meeting place where people can start dealing with the essentials rather than the culture wars or the worship wars or whatever. And I you know, can we see each other again in this meeting place? And is some aspect of liturgy, granted there's a spectrum of it, be a place where we can meet together again?
I think that's a fascinating suggestion and uh, challenging one.
Hmm.
Um, When I think back to my earlier experience and both myself and the organizations, excuse me, that I was involved in, um, the traditional Presbyterian worship had been and could be, especially back in the day, um, pretty dry and dusty,
Yeah,
and it was not fully lived out.
yeah,
It was kind of a this is what it says in the book. I guess this is what we should do,
yeah,
uh, kind of a thing. People didn't think about it, I don't think, too much. And so, in response to that, the more free-flowing form of worship was where Jesus really was. Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and this was stifling old traditional stuff. Jesus didn't call us to that. Jesus wants to have a relationship with us, and so we're going to sing the praise songs and
And we want a little rock and roll,
a little rock and roll, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're right in that that kind of poisoned the well,
Uh-huh.
uh, and cut off a a route to unity that might have
Right.
been useful otherwise. To be able to say include some elements, I think is really helpful. Um, you know, our book of common worship
Uh-huh.
um, says in the preface, and I
Oh,
always
here
keep
you can. Why don't you hold it up to show
I
people what it
always
looks like?
I always
There you
keep it
go.
handy.
You always keep one around.
Yeah. Um, the 1990 version or 1993 version of it, the
Uh-huh.
first one, is especially well done and laid out. It in itself is a beautiful thing. It
Uh-huh.
kind of conveys uh, what the content in the
Yeah.
form. And sadly, the more recent revision is more like an encyclopedia of worship material, and
Yeah, yeah,
it,
yeah. A
it,
resource. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a sad decline.
Yeah.
Um, but among the things it says is, well, first of all, just to get this on the table, worship is at the very heart of the church's life.
Yeah.
All church is and does is rooted in its worship. The community of faith gathered in response to God's call is formed in its worship. Worship is the principal influence that shapes our faith and is the most visible way we express the
Wow.
faith.
Oh yeah. I mean, that sounds very Book
Um,
of Order, like the Book of Order.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And but it goes on to say in this preface um, to invoke the principle of form and freedom.
Yeah.
That's right in the preface.
Uh-huh.
So there is a form, and there's also freedom. At another point in the book, it talks about worship being having the form, and also being shaped for the particular setting.
Hmm.
So so if we're not going to do a whole Lord's Day worship from the Book of Common Worship, maybe we have a prayer of confession and a declaration of forgiveness.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Maybe we have a call to worship and a benediction at the end, a charge and blessing, as it says
Yeah.
there. Maybe if we have a printed order of worship or a one on the screen, there is a responsive reading, or responsive prayer or something like
Yeah.
that. So some elements can be incorporated.
You know, it's
And
interesting because when you're talking, I'm thinking about I did an interview of uh, a Methodist pastor who's totally digital last summer. His name is Jeremy Steele, and he's kind of a big he has a big presence on TikTok and other places. And he talks about how young his encounters with young people is that worship's boring, right? Physical church is boring. And of course, we've heard that our whole lives. And I'm thinking, yeah, but the data kind of doesn't support that. I or the direction. And I get it. And I go, well, why, you were talking about dustiness, right? And uh, well, that's because, but that's not the form that was dusty. It was its application or is that what you mean by that? Do you mean it's more about how you do it rather than what it is you do?
I think even pre-Book of Common Worship, which we sometimes abbreviate BCW, which is almost as long. Um, but it lets you know that you're part of the in group.
Yeah.
Um, Even before that, the dusty service, if someone would have said, well, we're going to do forgiveness and our baptismal entry into the life of the church is
Yeah.
one. Remember that. How about if we move the font out of the corner and put it put it in the middle
Yeah.
and reference the water physically when
Yeah. Yeah.
we could have done that at any time,
Right.
but we didn't, and et cetera, et cetera. Um, so what was the question?
Well, is that well? I mean, I think that's you kind of answered it in a way. Is that in the 1940s or 50s or whatever, when liturgical worship was the norm, much more the norm, you didn't really have the baptismal in front when lifting the water, right? In most churches, so it's kind of
Right.
like it. It's not the form that's the pro. It kind of it's like not the form. It's what you do with it.
Correct. Although you do want the form to honestly convey the values that we cherish and hold
Yeah.
dear that form us. Um,
Yeah.
to use the word form, the form forms us. And let's see, there was one thing I was going to say is, um, worship is boring. Um,
Yeah.
Sometimes worship is boring. And even at the best of times, sometimes worship is boring. It's not always fun.
Yeah.
And
That's yeah.
that's hard in this consumer-oriented culture
Yeah.
because you got to make it fun, you got to make it engaging, you got to make it short and sweet, et cetera, et
Uh-huh.
cetera, et cetera. And that's not necessarily how worship works.
Yep.
And that's why I think education, sensitively done,
Hmm.
bringing people on board with why you want to sit through three readings in a psalm or whatever it is you want to do. I
Hmm.
mean, part of the part of the genius of the form when you're dealing with all those scripture readings, for
Yeah.
instance, is that the psalm is a commentary, is a soundtrack to the first reading, the Old
Uh,
Testament reading.
uh-huh.
And so you've got a song. Congregation is going to sing a song in the
Uh-huh.
midst of those readings, rather than just three or four things droning on. If there's a
Uh-huh.
choir, there will sometimes be an anthem between the second reading and the gospel reading.
Yeah.
So there are ways of engaging people in a kind of an anti-boredom um,
Yeah.
way. But yeah, it's speaking of that and Eastern Orthodox, one of the stories that's told in liturgical circles is of the young person who's
Uh-huh.
freshly enamored of liturgical structure, comes out of the Eastern Orthodox service and says to the priest, "Wow, I really loved your service. It's beautiful." To which he replied, "We don't care."
You know,
They're going
and
to
that
do
is
what they do.
well, and that's the thing is you'll never hear an Eastern Orthodox person talk about boredom in worship because that's not their goal. They don't
Right.
care. Their goal isn't to entertain.
Yeah. That,
And
that's
yeah.
it.
And and that it's practice, rather than entertainment. And sometimes it's hard. In fact, they often talk about it being hard. And I'm not saying that sometimes even evangelical people do this is where they'll, talk about, the suffering for the gospel and carrying your cross without realizing carrying your cross is something bigger than just suffering through worship, right?
Yes.
Um, but uh, this idea of a pattern is so much a part of, certainly Catholic worship, Eastern Orthodox, and of course, Catholics are fighting over whether you have Latin or not, right? And
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about pattern. And to that point, we all know that the human brain seeks patterns,
yeah,
sometimes discovering them where they don't really exist.
yeah,
On the other hand, that I think is a testimony to the fact that the human brain and perhaps the human heart and soul appreciates patterns,
Yeah.
and forms, and functions well with them,
Yep.
or because of them. And so I think that's an important thing to remember too. In his book, Holy Things, Gordon
Oh
La-
yeah.
Lathrop
Yeah.
introduced the readers, and certainly me, to something called the Ordo, which
Yes.
still don't
And
understand exactly.
he's Lutheran, by the way,
He's
in
Lutheran,
case.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lutheran liturgical theologian
Yeah.
and probably pastor or one-time pastor. Um, he uh, he says that there is this. I don't know. It's almost. Is it Aristotelian? There is
Uh-huh.
an ideal that exists
Oh,
separately.
Platonic. Yeah.
Platonic. Thank you.
Hmm.
Platonic. Um, Platonic
An
ideal.
archetype.
An archetype, yeah, that emerges and feeds our order. So there's an
Yeah.
order behind the order
Uh-huh.
of worship, and the order is to facilitate
Yeah.
human beings being able to do this thing, whatever this thing is. I sometimes think churches aren't the only things that have
Yeah.
liturgies,
That's
um,
true.
and and
Everybody has a liturgy. It's just how rich
yeah.
is it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, look at a Timbers soccer game,
Yes.
or just about any other athletic
Uh-huh.
event.
Yeah.
There's a call to worship.
Hmm.
There's input from a outside source. There's hymns.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I even say sometimes because I wear a collar, that's my rather than the shepherd's robe or the Geneva robe, I tend to wear a collar for worship, and people will criticize me for that, saying, "Well, you look like you're Catholic or something." I go, "No, well, first of all, no, it's not Catholic. Protestants wear these things too." But I go, "You think that your church, your pastor doesn't wear a uniform? Yes, they do." Even if that uniform is an untucked church shirt with skinny jeans, that you see every evangelical church I've ever been to, mega church I've been to, the pastor's wearing a uniform. It's just a different kind, right? So, and they have their own liturgy. It's just, you know, so it's not as stripped down as you think,
Right.
or
Well,
as they think.
and a key point there, I think, is that there is a liturgy, and that people kind of know it because they're accustomed to it and they do it every Sunday. Um, and they do participate. In all fairness, they do
Uh-huh.
participate. But the liturgy, as you alluded to at the very beginning, is a little bit hidden from the
Yeah.
congregation.
Right.
They weren't a
They
part.
pretend it's not there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, I guess to close here, Jeff, or wind down, I just wanted to ask where you headed? What do you want to do to kind of spread the word and, and in your retirement? Because you're still quite active in your retirement. And what does that mean for you? And how, how, how can you be a good example for us that are going to approach retirement?
Well, that's a work in progress, and it's kind of interesting to find one's place in presbytery post-retirement.
Uh-huh.
And I think I was pretty well prepared for retirement in many ways. Never considered myself one of those, the kind of person who is so tied up in their occupation that they have no identity beyond it. Uh,
Yeah.
and yet, I have been a little bit caught off guard by how much the identity is tied,
Yes.
even despite your best efforts. I mean, it's embedded in
Yeah, yeah,
ways
yeah.
that
Oh yeah,
you
I'm terrified of retirement, honestly.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and one of the things I've realized is that I really like the freedom and flexibility
Yeah.
uh, on one side. On the other side, that places a whole other level of responsibility to form one's or shape one's life,
Yeah.
um, and in ways that just were not necessary and for which some of us may not be well equipped. Um, because the work shapes you. There's going to be a sermon on Sunday. There's
Uh-huh.
a staff meeting on Tuesday. There's a Bible study. There's a podcast. Um, all that, and and I, Presbytery is always looking for people to be on committees or lead committees, and I would be open to that.
Uh-huh.
Uh, um, but I realized at one point the job I wanted was uh, special counsel to the executive presbyter. Um, there is no
There,
position, there is no such
right.
position. But I bring all this experience. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
and not just to sit on a committee.
Right.
Um, so that's been a little bit of a challenge. But
Yeah.
the latest development, and to be a pastor, a recently working pastor in a congregation that you're not pastor of,
Yeah.
um, is more of a challenge than I realized, because they're not necessarily interested in all my brilliance.
Yeah,
Uh,
right. Yes, that's
but
true. And they don't know. I mean, that happens to me a lot, is that, most people don't know that I have this whole work history before being a pastor.
Right, right.
And yeah.
Which adds to the richness of your presence in this work now. But the last thing I'll say is the new development is that I've accepted a position to be a parish associate in a
Oh,
congregation, uh,
wonderful.
15 hours a week.
Oh, wonderful.
And this church is kind of freshly evolving with a kind of novel leadership structure. They
Uh-huh.
recently made some big decisions about being open and affirming, and they are trying to be socially connected,
Uh-huh.
and and deepen and expand their faith. So um, I'm looking forward to being a part of an adventure like that. And since I have served, I've served three churches, but one for 26 years. Uh,
Yes, right. Yeah.
and so I have not had a lot of the experience of being in a situation of discerning what is going on, who the people are, where I can contribute, where I can challenge,
Uh-huh.
maybe, and where I can offer. So I'm kind of simultaneously looking forward to that and a little bit scared. Um,
I can't wait to hear more about it because
yeah,
yeah, that's such a wonderful example of, I think, the church is becoming something new. Um, I'm very appreciative of the fact that I'm young enough that I'll be able to see what it becomes, but I'm old enough to have the experience behind, see where it came from. It's a neat time of life that, I really, I tell younger people, I go, this is the neat time of life when you're in that middle time.
that's a great insight, and it makes me think of something that Heather Cox Richardson said recently, last month or two. People might know that she's the historian who has become very popular in some
Yeah.
circles, um, for a kind of telling things like it is when it comes to history
Yes.
and politics. And she is often called upon to offer people hope in what her
Uh-huh.
audience considers to be difficult times. And she said recently, in closing, basically,
Uh-huh.
it was kind of a privilege. She said it's a privilege to be involved in defending democracy.
Yeah.
And it kind of startled me to life. It's like, oh my gosh, this
Yeah.
is Hamilton Part Two. Um, and we're in the room where it happens.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think the same is true of the church.
Definitely.
It's a
Yeah.
privilege to be on the front lines or in the game, even
Yes.
at
The
this
about the
point.
emergence, the
Yeah.
decolonializing the church, having it become something, I just get thrilled when I meet a 30-year-old who has no idea about the um uh, what the church was like in the 60s and 70s. And that's great. They don't care. They go crazy when they hear 80-year-olds talk about how great it was, and they go, nah, it wasn't really all that. It had its moment, right? So.
Yep.
I guess we'll close here, and thank you so much, Jeff, for joining me and kind of this is kind of a bookend in a way because I've talked to a number of people who are pretty deconstructing and have a lot of criticisms about church and Christianity, and your enthusiasm for liturgy is building, and I think there's room for both of these conversations, right? And we need both of
Yep.
those. So
Yep.
thank you for being part of the building side of the things that I like to talk about. So
You're so welcome, Rob. It's been
yeah.
a pleasure and a gift.
Well, as I always like to say, people say lots of things about the Bible, and that includes worship, and that includes the church that aren't really there. And we try to bring new light to what's possible and give hope. And that's what
Amen.
I
Amen,
try to do.
brother.
Amen. And thank you, and God bless you.